Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at Bitcoin, trying to figure out, what's going on with the price. It's been surging like crazy, and we're also going to try to figure out what the Fed is doing and how that all plays into this. So to help us out, we've got two articles. One is from a pretty well-known crypto news site, and then we've also got one from CNBC, which, gives us that sort of bigger picture view. So by the end of this deep dive, hopefully you'll understand what's happening with Bitcoin a little better, and maybe even have some ideas about what this could mean for, your own money.
Yeah, it is fascinating to see how these two worlds are sort of colliding, the world of traditional finance and then this new digital asset class. There's just so much we don't know yet. And I think that's what makes this so interesting.
Totally. Okay, well, let's jump right in. Both of these articles mention how Bitcoin has just been skyrocketing. It hit a new all-time high, over $106,000, before dropping back down pretty quickly. But the CNBC article actually says that Bitcoin is up like 50% just since the election. And get this, it's up 145% since the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. You just don't see those kinds of gains every day.
Yeah, and I think that's really just the nature of Bitcoin. It's still a pretty young market, So any news, whether it's good or bad, it can really send the price swinging wildly.
Right. And I guess that's what people mean when they talk about volatility.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about the Fed. Everyone's saying they're probably going to cut interest rates again. So can you break that down for us? What does that actually mean? And why is everyone making such a big deal about it?
Sure. So basically, when the Fed cuts rates, they're making it cheaper for banks to borrow money. And the idea is that this encourages more lending and spending, which can then help boost the economy. So they're expected to cut rates by 0.25%. Or 25 basis points, as you often hear them called.
Right. And this isn't the first time they've cut rates this year, is it?
Nope, not at all. This would actually be a continuation of the same policy they started back in September. Since then, we've already seen a total of 100 basis points in cuts.
Oh, gotcha.
So this would bring us to a total of 125 basis points since they started.
Wow. Okay, so December 18th, big day. We get the announcement from the Fed. We get the dot plot, which gives us some insight into what they're thinking about future rate cuts. And then just 30 minutes later, we get Jerome Powell himself holding a press conference. But really, though, how important are his comments going to be?
Well, the dot plot does give us some clues about their future plans. But yeah, Powell's statements carry a lot of weight. Everyone's going to be listening very carefully, trying to figure out what he really means, trying to get a sense of how aggressive they might be moving forward.
So it's not just what they do, it's what they say they're going to do.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So we've got this rate cut that's coming, which could be good for Bitcoin. But then I keep hearing about this thing called a hawkish rate cut. Even the crypto article mentioned it. They quoted some market strategist who thinks that the Fed might say they're going to slow down on these rate cuts. So is that like a contradiction or something?
Well, it might seem that way, but it basically means they're trying to walk a tightrope, trying to stimulate the economy, but without letting inflation get out of control. So they're cutting rates. But at the same time, they're saying, hey, we're not going to go crazy with this.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. But wouldn't a stronger dollar, which is what we usually see with a more hawkish Fed, wouldn't that make it harder for people to buy Bitcoin? Especially people outside the U.S. Wouldn't that sort of cancel out any positive effect from the rate cut?
That's a great point. You're absolutely right. A stronger dollar could definitely make Bitcoin less appealing to some investors, especially those buying with other currencies. And that's what makes this whole situation so interesting. We've got these different forces kind of pushing and pulling in opposite directions.
Okay, so help me understand that a bit more. We've got this potentially hawkish Fed on one side, but what else is going on?
Well, for one thing, this time of year is usually good for Bitcoin. It tends to perform well around the holidays.
Interesting.
And then you've got the president-elect's stance on crypto, which so far seems pretty positive. He's even talked about creating a national strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Oh, wow.
Which could potentially counterbalance some of the Fed's influence.
So it's like a tug of war. And then on top of all that, we have China. They're expected to ease their monetary policy too, which means there's going to be more money flowing around globally. So could that be a good thing for Bitcoin?
Absolutely. More money in the system usually benefits assets like Bitcoin. It just adds another layer of complexity to this whole dance between global economics and the crypto market.
Wow, this is getting complicated.
It is. But there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to consider, and it's a big one: inflation.
Ah, yes, inflation. The word that makes everyone nervous. Why should we care about inflation in all of this?
Well, inflation is basically how much prices are going up. And it's a really important factor in the Fed's decisions. Remember, they have two main goals: to keep inflation under control and to keep unemployment low. So if inflation starts rising too fast, they might have to take more drastic action. And that could affect their interest rate policy.
So it's like a balancing act for them.
It really is.
Okay, so let me recap. We've got this possible hawkish rate cut, then we've got Bitcoin's tendency to do well around the holidays. We've got the president-elect who seems to be pro-crypto, China easing its monetary policy, and then this whole question of inflation. That's a lot to keep track of.
It definitely is.
So what's the main takeaway from all this?
I think the main takeaway is that trying to predict what Bitcoin is going to do in the short term is pretty much impossible. There are just so many factors at play. But if you understand these dynamics, you'll be in a better position to navigate this market and make better decisions.
Yeah, it's like you got to learn the rules of the game before you start playing.
Exactly.
Okay, but before we move on, there's one more thing I wanted to touch on from the crypto article. MicroStrategy, that company that's basically gone all in on Bitcoin. They're going to be joining the NASDAQ 100 index and the QQQ ETF. That sounds like a pretty big deal, like more mainstream acceptance, more institutional investment. What do you think?
Yeah, on the surface it does sound very positive. But there's one detail in the article that I found interesting. Despite this announcement, the shares of both MicroStrategy and Coinbase were basically unchanged.
Huh. That is weird. Why wouldn't the market react more to that news?
That's a great question. It definitely makes you wonder, is this a sign that institutional investors are starting to lose interest in Bitcoin? Or maybe the market had already priced this news in. It's definitely something to think about as we try to understand how people are feeling about Bitcoin overall.
Okay, so maybe it's a sign of a more mature market where investors are thinking more strategically and not getting so caught up in the hype.
I think that's a great way to put it. As the market matures, we're likely to see more differentiation, with some projects and companies attracting more investment than others.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got all these different factors influencing Bitcoin's future. This potentially hawkish Fed. The fact that Bitcoin usually does well this time of year. A president who seems to be pro-crypto. China easing its monetary policy. This big question mark about inflation.
Yeah.
And now this weird lack of excitement about MicroStrategy's big news. Where do we even go from here?
That's what we're going to explore in the rest of this deep dive. We'll try to connect all these dots and see what it all means for the future of Bitcoin. And more importantly, what it could mean for you. Remember, knowledge is power, especially in a world as fast-moving as crypto.
That's a great point. So stay tuned, everybody, as we continue to unpack this whole Bitcoin situation. It's a fascinating world, and it can be pretty confusing at times.
It can.
But that's why we're here, to try and make sense of it all.
It's definitely a fast-moving world.
It is. And, you know, you've talked about how the Fed's decisions are just one piece of this whole puzzle. It's like there's this global economic dance happening, and Bitcoin is right in the middle of it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It really is like an ecosystem where a change in one area, like China easing its monetary policy, can have effects all over the world, and that includes things like Bitcoin.
So it's all connected.
It is.
So let's zoom out for a second and think about our listener who's maybe just starting to learn about crypto. What does all of this mean for them?
That is the million-dollar question. And honestly, no one can say for sure what's going to happen with Bitcoin, but what we can do is arm ourselves with knowledge and understanding.
Right. Knowledge is power.
Exactly. And you know, one thing I find really interesting is that even with all this uncertainty, the overall sentiment around crypto seems to be changing. We're seeing more mainstream acceptance, more institutional interest, and even governments are starting to explore digital currencies.
Yeah, it feels like crypto is becoming more and more mainstream.
It definitely does. And as more players enter the game, the dynamics are going to change. Regulation, for example, is becoming a really key factor.
Right, regulation. That word can make or break an entire industry.
It absolutely can.
So what do our sources say about that?
Well, it's still a bit of a wild west out there, but we're definitely seeing some progress. Some countries are embracing crypto, creating frameworks for how to use it, and even testing their own central bank digital currencies.
Wow, so some countries are really going all in on this.
They are. But then you've got other countries that are more cautious, focusing on protecting investors and preventing illegal activity.
So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah, you could say that.
It sounds like a global puzzle.
It really is. And that's part of what makes the space so fascinating. It's constantly evolving, challenging us to rethink finance, technology, even the nature of money itself.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, but it's exciting too. It feels like we're watching a financial revolution happen right in front of us.
I agree.
And speaking of revolutions, we were talking earlier about MicroStrategy joining the NASDAQ 100 and the QQQ ETF, but the market reaction was kind of strange. It was like nobody cared. You mentioned that might be a sign of waning enthusiasm from institutional investors. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. It's possible that institutional investors are getting more selective. Maybe they're focusing on specific projects or applications within crypto, rather than just blindly investing in the whole market. Or maybe they're worried about regulation. There's also the chance that the market had already factored this news in.
That makes sense. So maybe it's a sign that the market is maturing.
I think that's a very good possibility.
Okay, so to sum up, we've got the Fed making its moves, global trends shifting, and now we're seeing this evolution in how institutional investors are thinking about crypto. So what does our listener need to know to navigate this crazy world?
Well, first of all, remember that volatility is just part of the game with crypto. Don't get too caught up in the short-term price swings. Focus on the long-term potential.
Okay, so ride the waves, but keep your eyes on the horizon.
Exactly.
What else?
Stay informed. This landscape is constantly changing. Keep up with the news, the regulations, the technological advancements, and most importantly, don't be afraid to ask questions. Challenge assumptions and form your own opinions.
Very curious.
Yeah.
Be critical.
Be your own advocate.
I love that.
And you know, this is really just the beginning of your crypto journey.
It is. This deep dive is just a starting point.
Right.
Now, as we wrap up this episode, let's go back to the topic of Bitcoin's performance around this time of year. Historically, we've seen a trend of positive price movement during the holidays.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier, but is there a reason for that? Or is it just a coincidence?
There are a few theories. Some people think it's because of increased retail investment. People get holiday bonuses or gifts, and maybe they decide to put some of that money into Bitcoin. Others think it might be because Bitcoin gets more media attention during the holidays, which could lead to more awareness and investment.
So it could be a combination of things.
It probably is.
And those narratives about Bitcoin.
They play a huge role in shaping market sentiment.
Right.
We often hear about Bitcoin being a safe haven asset, especially when there's a lot of economic uncertainty. And that narrative could definitely gain traction as we head into the new year, with all the concerns about inflation and the global economy.
So that safe haven narrative, plus the fact that Bitcoin tends to do well during the holidays, could create a really bullish environment for Bitcoin in the coming weeks.
It's definitely possible, but remember, the crypto market is notoriously unpredictable. Past performance is never a guarantee of future results.
Right. So don't get too carried away.
Exactly. It's important to approach this space with a healthy dose of skepticism, diversify your investments, and never invest more than you can afford to lose.
Good advice. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one final thought you want to leave our listener with?
This is just the beginning of your journey into the world of crypto. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, never stop learning. This space is constantly evolving, and the more you understand, the better equipped you'll be to navigate its complexities and hopefully reap the rewards.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this part of our deep dive. Stay tuned for the final part where we'll explore the human side of all this. We've talked about the Fed and the global economy and regulations. But earlier you said something that really stuck with me. You said that sentiment, fear and greed can really drive these markets, especially in the crypto world. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, absolutely. We can look at all the data and do all the analysis we want, but at the end of the day, we can't ignore the human element. Every investment decision, especially in a volatile market like crypto, is influenced by emotions. When fear takes over, people sell, and that drives prices down. But when greed takes over, people buy, and that can push prices up to unsustainable levels.
So it's like a roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah, you could say that.
But how do we, as individual investors, how do we deal with those emotional waves?
That's the million-dollar question. It's about recognizing that those emotions are part of the game and learning how to manage them. One way to do that is to really focus on your own investment goals and your own risk tolerance. Don't get caught up in the hype or the panic. Make decisions based on your own research and your own understanding of the fundamentals.
Right, so have a plan and stick to it.
Exactly.
But how do we really get a handle on those fundamentals, especially when there's so much information out there? And it's changing all the time.
That's where critical thinking comes in. Don't just take everything you read or hear at face value. Question your sources. Look at things from different perspectives and try to connect the dots yourself. The more you engage with the information, the better equipped you'll be to form your own opinions.
So it's like being a detective in the crypto world,
Yeah, I like that analogy.
trying to solve the mystery.
Exactly. And remember, crypto is still a relatively young space. There's a lot we don't know yet. But that's also what makes it so exciting. By staying curious, asking questions, and thinking critically, we can navigate this complex world and hopefully make some smart decisions along the way.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listener to remember?
I think the most important thing to remember is that the crypto world is this incredible mix of technology, finance, and human behavior. It's constantly evolving, and it offers both opportunities and risks. Stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, never stop learning.
Well said. Knowledge is power. And in the world of crypto, that power is in your hands. A huge thank you to our expert for helping us understand this amazing landscape, and to you, our listener. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've learned something new and that you're excited to keep exploring the world of crypto. Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and happy investing.